Hello, this is Dread, and in today's video topic, this is going to be the Zero to Hero episode on the Gathering Storm Strength Stacking Physical Melee Beastmaster. So, the concept around this specific build is to utilize the node inside of Gathering Storm that allows you to stack strength to get a bunch of flat damage with the melee portion of Gathering Storm. If you ever encountered Gathering Storm in other videos, including mine, you'd notice that usually we were building around the spell portion. But this time around, I decided to build around the melee portion, as I thought stacking strength could indeed make a good character, and I was mostly right. Now, the biggest problem that I had with this build is the clear, as you are essentially playing basic attack plus for most of the character's existence. I think EHG should probably fix this in some ways or another. Like, for instance, there could be a node that disables the storms, like in general for your Gathering Storm, but it gives you like more area and more damage per storm you have on you, like like the Gathering Storm procs and stuff like that. And that could help a lot. Just in general, I just think melee area options are very lacking. Like the area that you see in the footage right now, that's like the maximum that I've been able to get in about a day's worth of playtime. And I feel as though we should have access to maybe just a little bit more area than what you're seeing right now. So I just want to be honest with this. I did not push the entire 10 out of 10 harbingers with this character, not because it couldn't deal with the bosses. I could actually face tank the bosses and do plenty of damage to them. I was having a problem with clearing with the build because there's just a few different reasons why I was having problems with it, but we'll get into that as we talk about the build. So if you haven't already, I would heavily suggest leaving a like on the video and subscribing to the channel, as that is the best way of currently supporting me, and it's the best way to show me that you want more videos like this on YouTube. Alright, where do we start? Well, first off, the name. I named it Fake Sentinel. The main reason I called it that is because this is when I was supposed to play Sentinel in my rotation. Normally, I play like a rotation of masteries. So for instance, I'll like play Primalist, then Rogue, then Mage, etc. Right? And this was supposed to be when I played a Sentinel. But the problem is Sentinel is getting a gigantic change next patch, specifically around Volatile Reversal getting essentially removed from the game and being replaced with a different skill, meaning that the viability and the strength of Sentinel is very on the line here. EHG has reworked some things in the past, but my problem is they haven't always gone as swimmingly. Like, for instance, recently, there was a nerf slash change slash buff, whatever you want to call it, to Serpent Strike. And it's probably one of the worst skills in the game right now because of that, mainly due to just how hard they hit it in terms of just its scaling options and stuff like that. Like the current version is definitely not what I would call a good skill currently. And that makes it so that I love EHG, don't get me wrong, but I also don't trust them blindly with the balancing of an entire mastery, because Sentinel right now is Volatile Reversal. So hopefully we'll see proper buffs for Sentinel. Like for instance, a good example here is a Volatile Reversal for dot builds on Sentinel. We're giving them like low key, like 300% more damage. Around if you were to max it out on Volatile Reversal, also give you a lot of mobility. It gave you just so many different things that I am not confident in playing a Sentinel build until we see the changes, because Sentinel might either be really good, which means everything I've done up to this point is outdated, or it's really, 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 really bad, which then, of course, everything I would do would be outdated. So instead, we're going to play a Primalist instead. So we're doing something different this time around. Normally, as a Primalist, you would be utilizing Thorn Totem for most of your leveling experience, but this time around, we're actually going to scale Gathering Storm. That is because the Gathering Storm Strength Stacking Physical node is very close to the start of Gathering Storm's tree. It's like 3 points away. This means that you can actually get a bunch of flat physical for your damage, because one of the biggest problems with leveling as a just a build that uses a weapon early on instead of like ailments or spells is your flat is very hard to come by. Getting a good weapon early on is significantly more difficult than getting, like, let's say, a good weapon for a throwing build, a good weapon for a spell build, because you just simply get a staff. It has all the flat you'll ever need. You're good to go. But with a melee weapon, you need flat, attack speed, crit. You need all these other things, all these stat gear checks that having Gathering Storm worry about the flat part is great. It helps us fix that portion of just character design. Here's our Harrispex Orion. Pretty simple. Instead of specking into totems, like I said, we're specking to Gathering Storm. So we can just do plenty of damage. It's really not that difficult early on. It's just slow and boring. So we're fast forwarding a little bit here. I feel as though this is when I got the strength stacking node, or at least a little bit before this. The strength stacking actually ends up being very strong because if you end up with like 100 flat in endgame, right? Like right now on my gear and my character, I already have like 21 flat. To give you an idea, most weapons at this point have like 20 flat on them. So we're doubling our damage with that node. And our Gathering Storm actually kind of hits like a truck right now, as you'll see with this boss. Every single time we actually land and hit with Gathering Storm, we do plenty of damage. Our attack speed's kind of Papega, but that's just generally primalist early on. You can't really do anything about the attack speed problem. As you can see, every single time I actually do hit, it actually does plenty of damage, which is the whole point of the strength stacking early on. So we do choose to go Beastmaster. The main reason is because if you're playing any melee crit build, Beastmaster is probably the best option for you, as not only with the aspect of the shark stacking, you get plenty of attack speed, you get the, all the nodes that give you like a bajillion attack speed at the top of Beastmaster. It's really hard to argue with Beastmaster in general, especially with the recent removal of aspect of the boar from the other Primalist masteries, meaning that Beastmaster can finally stand toe to toe with the other two, as per nerfing Shaman and Druid, specifically Druid here. Shaman didn't deserve the nerf, but Druid definitely did. By nerfing Druid, by reducing its DR capabilities, it means that Beastmaster, you have a lot more reasoning to do so, because Beastmaster has a lot of problems in the late game in terms of EHP stacking, as a lot of its nodes, a lot of its HP nodes suck. So the fact that Beastmaster has access to 15% extra DR than the other two classes have, and it also ends up having that uptime of that DR a lot more than like Druid would have, right? That means that it can actually stand toe to toe in endgame, which is great. I like build diversity in video games. It's great. To give you an idea of how powerful the strength stacking is early on, here's a boss here. As you can see, we're literally chunking them like crazy. It's kind of funny to see this. Now, Gathering Storm would be a meta skill option for early leveling Primalist if, and I mean if, its clear didn't suck titty balls. Like, it sucks so much. Like, the clear, like, because you're essentially playing basic attack. And I don't know. I don't know what they want us to do. Like, the problem is like the easy answer is to just play Earthquake, but then Earthquake does enough damage. Why are you fucking around with Gathering Storm? Cool. You can play Swipe. Swipe does plenty of damage. It has plenty of damage scaling in the end game. You could just play Swipe instead. So my problem is right now is I wish that there was more options to increase the melee scaling on Gathering Storm. Like I said before, you could just simply make it so that its AoE is much bigger and you'd be good to go. Of course, final boss of Act 2, like I said, just getting all that strength, making Gathering Storm hit like a truck, good to go. Of course, we also grab Warcry to get the Berserk stacks, as attack speed is very important to make your melee build actually feel good to play. Attack speed is like God, especially if you're playing a Beastmaster. To give you a little bit more insight of what I mean about the clear here, like, it feels really bad to play basic attack the build when you have like all of these enemies on top of you like this. And this is just a common theme with just Gathering Storm melee in general. Tempest Strike manages to deal with it because it has like really high attack speed. Swipe manages to deal with it because it has actual AoE scaling, while Gathering Storm is kind of lackluster in that department. I really do hope they buff it a little bit in the future. Here's our Hearten. Of course, as you can see, I'm just smacking them and doing pretty big numbers, all things considered. Turns out, like I said, you can hit pretty hard with it early on because of all of the strength stacking you have access to at the bottom of Primalist. You can put strength on all your gear, and not only does that give you flat damage, it also gives you percent damage. It also gives you armor percent, which means you can face tank things more. So strength stacking early on is pretty good, turns out. Now, this is where the build starts feeling a lot better than before, and that's because we managed to get a good sword. So you want to use a two-handed sword with this kind of build, mainly because it's nonsensical to try to go for a slow, heavy attack speed, kind of like less attack speed focused weapon like a hammer or something like that. When you get a bunch of flat from your skill, you want to go for something small, light, like that attacks very quickly, like of course a sword, to leverage all of that flat that you're getting. So that's actually why I end up with a Odachi way later. But essentially, you definitely want to go for anything that's quick and fast. Now, like I said, this is like where the build starts popping off a little bit. While in the early game, like I said, the biggest problem is clear, but our damage is there. As you can see, as we hit this profane flesh here, we are chunking him for a lot of damage, and we're doing plenty of damage. I think this is about when I managed to get the base crit on Gathering Storm. If you don't know, there's a node that gives you base crit per Maelstrom stack on you, and that essentially allows you to stack crit early on and helps you actually do enough damage to kill things. But um, you'll see it here in the footage a little bit, and you'll probably notice it as well. Like in general, one of the biggest problems with Beastmaster melee scaling is there's a lot of buffs to maintain. You have to click your Maelstrom, you have to click your Warcry, you have to click this, and that. Eventually, you have to click Frenzy Totem. There's all these buttons to press to do damage, and if you don't press those buttons, you don't do that much damage. Like it's a quadratic amount of damage you're gaining. Like you double your damage with one button, then you double it again with another button. And the problem is these buttons, they only have like maybe low amounts of duration on them, like 4 to 6 seconds. And that ends up becoming very tiresome while you're playing the late game, especially when you're doing mono after mono after mono after mono. Remember, I played this build in around like 14 hours or something like that. It sucks eventually, like it gets really mentally taxing, and it just makes it not fun. One interesting thing to note here is because of the fact that we're strength stacking, we can actually face tank Spymaster Zarek and Hearten at the same time while also being 10 levels under the zone, and we do plenty of damage. I actually managed to group them together in a way that I could hit them with my Gathering Storm every single time, and it actually ends up feeling pretty good. This is like the fastest I've killed these two, mainly just because of the fact that I can just face tank them, because Beastmaster has access to Leech in the base passive tree, meaning that I can just simply trade blows with them and just not take any damage. It feels good for this part, for bosses, right? Like for bossing, it feels great. Hey, look, Frostroot Warden's dead. Finish with the campaign. Let's go. So here's our first empowered monolith. As you can see, the build isn't that good. I had fun with it overall, like if I were to like rate my experience, but as I said earlier, I would rate my experience as mental taxing because of the constant button presses. It's not as bad when you play like Swipe because Swipe has better AoE. It's not bad when you play Earthquake because Earthquake has better AoE. Like, for instance, if I were to swing my sword and hit like the whole pack of mobs around me at once, every single time I swung, it wouldn't be that bad. But because of the fact that I have to sit there and trying to micromanage my character's position to hit range enemies and stuff like that, it's very obnoxious. Now, Primalist does have access to pull sources like Warcry, but the problem is the Warcry has like a 5 second cooldown, and when you're going through the monolith, you end up having to kill a lot of monsters, as you may well know, which means, like a 5 second cooldown doesn't help. Like, you need a little bit more. Like, if you're playing Rive, for instance, Rive just has pull built in. Like, for instance, if there was a node in Maelstrom that like pulled enemies near you, maybe that could work and you could scale the AoE of Maelstrom. There's a lot of different ways you could fix this problem that could make this build feel a lot better, but I still grind through it anyways because I'm having fun with the character. So this is where I start having a lot of fun with the character. So it turns out you can get a lot of stun chance utilizing Gathering Storm. You can get about 300% chance stun from the base tree, and then you can also get around like 600% chance to stun on average from Maelstrom. This means you have a total of 900% chance to stun enemies. Turns out when you're also doing that, plus the strength stacking thing, plus the attack speed stacking thing, on top of being really tanky, things get really crazy. So here's my A bomb. I'm like 10 levels into the zone, of course. Here's my A bomb. Uh, you're gonna learn that his stun animation's really funny. There you go. Look at them. Look at him. This is like where the build starts feeling good, and I'm just like, wait a moment, there's something here. And let me tell you, this part's fun. Now, here's my second monolith. Like I said, button mash fiesta. If you don't press the buttons, you end up not doing as much damage as you should. Another big problem with this build is because of the fact that we're capping our crit with our maelstroms, we have to actually cast our maelstroms constantly, and that doesn't feel good. There's a lot of different reasons why I would rate this build not bad, but only like semi-playable. This would be a lot better in Trade League when I could like juice the character up with attack speed, area scaling, and stuff like that. Like for instance, later on, I actually get some area on my gloves, my amulet, and all that. And that ends up feeling pretty good. I never get access to a +4 to Gathering Storm, which would also give me a bajillion area as well. And I just never get access to that, which sucks, but whatever, it's good enough. What's really cool though, I found is I feel like as though I haven't really needed that good of a weapon to make the character work. Although we did drop an Odachi at this point. So this Odachi had tier 6 melee flat physical and tier 5 melee attack speed, and it's on the, of course, melee crit base. Since we're solving our crits with Gathering Storm, this ends up being insanely strong for us early on, and it ends up pretty much like carrying us all the way through to our first few harbingers. Like I don't actually swap out of this weapon. It just ended up being that good. Here's our Rai kill. Unfortunately, Rai has really weird interactions with stun. So if you stun him too much, he ends up just becoming absurdly awkward in general. Like he'll end up doing abilities in quick succession and stuff like that. He does not act well while under stun. Like it's really weird in general. As you can see there, I chunked a whole hit because of that stun weirdness and all that. Well, you end up killing him anyways, as we have plenty of damage early on. That's something I noticed. Like I said, we have plenty of damage early on. We just did not have damage like in the late game. For clear specifically. For bosses, we had plenty of damage just for clear. Here's our third monolith. This is where the cracks start to form. Unfortunately, the Divine Era mobs, they are what I would call effectively bullet sponges, and it ends up making like the build feel a lot worse because like I said, if those buffs that you have, they fall off, well guess what? Character no worky anymore. So you have to constantly press the buttons and I don't know, man. It just after playing it, I was enjoying it in the moment, but rewatching the gameplay, it just makes it feel bad. Like now here's our Lagan. We do plenty of damage to kill him. The biggest problem though is when we stun his tentacles, he doesn't actually get stunned. A lot of our bossing early on is just stun locking things with all of our gigantic amounts of stun. And we pretty much can't do that to him because his tentacles get stunned. He doesn't get stunned. But we do plenty of damage and we're tanky enough, so it doesn't really matter per se. Like there, I like tank the I beam and shit like that. Not that big of a deal. It's just more annoying per se, right? Here's our fourth mono. As I said, more Divine Era mobs and more cringe. But like, it's just so hard to quantify how I feel because I've had such a fun time with the build, but I know it's not that good. And like I said, I know why it's not good. And it's not necessarily the numbers I gave. It's not necessarily the bit like it's not a me thing. It's a build thing. Like just not having enough AoE on that Gathering Storm is such a big problem in general. Like you end up spending so long trying to kill things because the AoE just isn't that big. And the scaling of it isn't that large either. Like you can end up with like 300% increased melee area or whatever, something like that, like I have in the end game. And it still doesn't feel as good as it should. Now, of course, I have the pulls, and the pulls make it feel a lot better, but still, it's not as impactful as I would like it to be, right? So here's our Emperor of Corpses. As you'll notice as I'm smacking him, his stun animation is really funny. It's like a bounce house animation. It's great. It's really freaking funny. It's just boop, 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 boop. And like you can see here, we're doing plenty of damage. Like the damage is not the problem whatsoever. When we're actually hitting a boss, stacking up our aspect of the shark, getting our berserk, making our maelstrom uptime fine, when we're doing this, the build feels great and looks amazing. It's just whenever we're killing white mobs, which is just such a funky problem to have to deal with. Here's our first 90 mono. As you can see here, just having to try to pull enemies into our melee area. I believe I got a few upgrades at this point, so I'm feeling a bit better than I was earlier about the build. As you can see, I'm like killing these eyes pretty quickly, and I'm doing plenty of damage, but I really do think that we end up just pushing. Like, I think if I was to play this in trade, I wouldn't have that much of a problem because I would have been able at that point where I get 10 out of 10 harbingers. I could have bought some upgrades. I could have gotten a +4 to gathering storm chest. I could have gotten some gloves with attack speed on them, like proper attack speed. Like, I could have done a bunch of other things to make the build feel better that I normally would have access to, but because it's COF, I have to deal with floor trash, and usually the only builds that do well with floor trash are the ones that are overtuned or EHG hasn't really gotten around to balancing yet. Here's our Spirits of Fire. It actually ends up being pretty easy because once we get them all into one singular area, we can actually like kill them properly. As you can see with the little trick here that I do where I walk over to the left, then bring that. Cyborg actually taught me that, the dude who plays a bunch of Spellblade. Uh, but the idea here, of course, is we try to get them into all in one spot so we can hit them and punch them. And as you can see, our Gathering Storm is doing plenty of damage. Like that's really good damage for this portion, right? Especially considering I'm like 20 levels under the zone. Like, this is what we like to see with our damage early on. Like, this is like above average damage. Like, we're good to go. Like, ooh, that felt great. Now, here's our second 90 mono. As you can see, when I actually get around to pulling enemies in and overlapping them properly, the build feels a lot better. But the problem is, in the end game, you end up with a lot of what I would call annoying mobs. So you have things like lightning elementals that shoot under your feet. You have Maruna sirens that like walk off screen and you can't deal with them properly. You have Osprix raiders, which chase you down and make you not want to stand still. You have Osprix light mages, which, oh, don't even get me started with those. Like not being able to stand still. Oh, like that feels terrible, right? There's just so many different things that make you not want to stand still right now. Like, look at this. Like, for instance, poison enemies are really bad early on for this build because of the fact they deal poison. We don't have that much DR for poison, but we can kill them and sunlock them right now, right? But like later on, it feels worse. So here's the most hilarious part of the entire video. Here's Heorot. Now, remember how Heorot is supposed to have mechanics? Well, what if he just didn't have mechanics? Ever thought that maybe that would be funny? Well, we find out this cruel reality we live in where Heorot has no mechanics. As you can see, he's just sitting there and accepting his trip to the glue factory like a good boy. The 900% stun chance really is putting in the work right now. It's crazy how well the build performs now versus how I feel about it later. Now, here's our first Harbinger. Turns out they don't have that much HP, at least the first 91, which means they end up getting stunned pretty frequently. As you can see, they actually have a stun animation. I didn't even know that they had one, as usually I'm killing them with non-stun things. Because if you don't know, stun in Last Epoch right now is very abusive and will probably get nerfed into the ground the moment the devs realize that you can stun lock bosses still. But like that means that I usually don't touch it because I think it's overpowered. But as you can see, that's the power of stun right now. Now, of course, as you remember, another character, another time we have to kill Jurla and access our COF so we can actually get some decent drops. Like I said, I don't actually like COF right now. I think COF is kind of bad, but I can't really play and trade with these, so I might as well play COF, right? Now here's our first empowered mono. It goes pretty well. The scaling from 90s to empowered monos isn't that hard, but the scaling from 0 corruption to 300 is pretty high, all things considered, especially if you're playing a stupid melee bad build like I am right now. So yeah, another problem this build has is because of the way that aspect of the shark works. If you don't know, you only gain stacks on either kill or by hitting a rare enemy, right? It ends up making this part of the game feel terrible because moon spires or just spires in general, they're not rare, meaning you don't get ear stacks of it, and they also end up having a lot of HP in general. Spires are notorious for being annoying for builds that care about rares and bosses, as they just end up with a lot of HP in general in comparison to what you're trying to do. And also, as well, aspect of the shark is actually how I get my armor shred stacks too at the moment. So, like, if I don't have my aspect of the shark stacks either, I don't get my armor shred stacks, and I'm a fizz build, and fizz builds do better with it. Like, it's all just a big mess. All right, here we are, the hardest part of the run as normal, the Harbinger of Chaos. This time around, it wasn't that bad, mainly because I'm tanky enough to face tank most things, as you can see. Being able to just sit there and tank it by utilizing like for instance, I think I have like 70 strength at this point. So I have plenty of armor to be able to face tank this stuff, and I'm doing plenty of damage, but getting to this point was very uncomfortable, mainly because of the fact, like I said, you have to do monoliths to, of course, deal with that. And the reason why the negative clear feels so bad right now in last epoch is because of favor generation. So if you have a build that does not clear that fast, like minion builds or melee builds like this, you end up in a gigantic negative in late game because of the way favor gain works, right? As you can see here, we're punching the Harbinger, doing pretty fine, all things considered, and we stun him every so often, and it feels overall pretty okay. Definitely not the worst Harbinger of Chaos I've ever killed. Like, definitely very safe, and sometimes safe is all you need, especially for your initial progression. Now, like I said, to give you an idea of how much HP Harbingers actually have, here is our first Oribus. Uh, we're about to mutilate this Oribus, mainly because of all of our stun chance. Oh, you thought you were going to do something? Oh, no, you're not. Like I said, stun is pretty overpowered, especially if a build that hits way harder than I do. Stun is crazy. It's going to get nerfed into the ground when the devs actually realize how strong it is, but right now they have no idea, so shh. Here, I'm trying to slam a Siphon of Anguish I got, as Doom stacks are pretty good for melee builds, as they give like 16% increased melee damage taken, but our ring ends up being garbage, but we end up putting it on anyways because it's a Doom ring, and the damage you get from the Doom ring and the leech as well, it's just good enough to use anyways. So here's our third Harbinger. This actually ends up being kind of difficult, not because of the fact that the Harbinger itself is very difficult, but because that dot tick they put on the ground. We're playing a Beastmaster. Beastmasters are notoriously annoyed by damage over time, mainly because a lot of your DR and you end up with like a very low amount of HP. It's just not very good against dots. While if you're stacking armor, like I am, of course, right? I have like maybe 50% armor DR at this point, which almost does nothing for damage over time. And that ends up becoming really annoying, as you may well notice, because, every single time there's a dot on the ground, my leech isn't as strong. Now, of course, we could fix this by getting extra leech, which I should have done. But in general, damage over time is a menace later on. So it makes this feel a lot more awkward than it should have been. I know you can't tell in the footage, but I was kind of like sweating bullets a little bit, mainly because like you know, like if I were to die, that just wastes like 10 minutes of my time. And I'm trying to rush as fast as possible because at this point, I feel as though the build is fun and all, but it's definitely not something that I would want to play more. Mainly because like I don't think EHG has really balanced the idea of melee gathering storm that well, but we're still playing it anyways. Of course, second Oribus, it goes a lot like the first one. We just simply stun lock them into oblivion. Of course, we got another poison one, I think, which is funny. The poison one actually is one of the easier shades for the most part, depending on depending on what your build does. But usually he's the easier one because his abilities aren't as difficult later on. Like they can one shot you later on with enough corruption scaling because of course poison, but if you just simply dodge them, it's not that hard. And of course, as you can see here, we stun lock them pretty hard, so that doesn't really matter. Maybe we could get some stun duration. That may make it better. So this is where I decide to go and use some of my favor. I usually try to not touch the prophecies from COF, mainly because I'm actually testing these builds for Merchant's Guild. I'm not testing them for COF. But sometimes when the build isn't as good, I end up turning to COF to use the prophecies a little bit. Because like I said, normally I just don't use them. But here I'm trying to get trying to get exalted body armors. That's because I'm trying to get access to a +4 to Gathering Storm. If you don't know, on Gathering Storm itself, the affix, you end up getting a bunch of increased melee area or just increased area in general. And that could help and soothe some of my melee woes, right? But I don't actually end up getting a chest that's like usable from this, unfortunately. I end up getting a nice strength stanky one, but like nothing like I would actually care about. In trade, this would be kind of easy to do because no one fucking plays Gathering Storm the way I'm playing it right now. So you would end up with a pretty good chest very quickly in trade. So I ended up doing my fourth Harbinger, but I didn't end up recording it because I forgot. If you don't know, Harbinger of Ash, that's the fourth one we dealt with. He's the really anti-melee big fat one. And let me tell you, it was not fun on this build. It was not fun at all, mainly because he puts that damage over time tick on you, and it ends up feeling awful because of that. Other Fat Harbingers, pretty easy. It's just this one specifically because he puts the dot on you is really annoying. He's very anti-melee, so I was trying to deal with him first instead of dealing with him later. Like I could deal with like all the other like light Harbingers pretty easily. I could face tank their attacks, but the fat one with the damage over time aura, oh my god, oh it was so painful. So like it was not fun. I just want to let you know, like, if you're trying to play this build, don't do that, by the way. Don't play this build at all. Please, please don't play this build. But if you were, and you were to fight, like, make sure you fight him as one of your first few ones because, he was so fucking annoying. Here's our fifth Harbinger, Harbinger of War. As you can see, I can kind of just face tank him and have some fun. He's a little annoying, mainly because he likes to keep going outside of the terrain, and as well, he puts dots on you as well, so he just ends up being difficult. Anything with damage over time, anything with anti-melee on it, it just makes our life much worse. But thankfully, we have enough leech and enough chunk that we can kind of like deal enough damage to him to be fine, but it's not a fun experience in the slightest. Like there are some Harbingers where we can literally just sit there the whole time not moving at all and delete them, like the Raya Harbinger, right? But this one I have to actually move because damage over time is absurdly overtuned in Last Epoch, meaning I have to actually move. And of course, the EHG devs have come out to say they hate melee, as they hate anything melee, as they wouldn't add things like this if they didn't hate melee, right? Kappa, totally, right? Meaning that my time ends up being terrible because of it. But we end up doing it anyways. It's just long and grindy and boring. Not what you want in your ARPG, right? And he keeps like fucking glitching out in the arena. Like, I really hate that. Like, I hate that he keeps glitching out of the arena because he can actually kill you while he's out of the arena, right? If you really think about it. And since I'm a leech build, I can't do shit if he's outside of the arena, right? I can't hit him. So, especially as a melee build, like, I don't know, man. I hope maybe one day they'll realize how bad melee is in general in Last Epoch, but who knows? We'll see. And of course, again, here's our third Orbis to give you a stark difference of what we dealt with before to what we deal with now. Here's an Orbis. Pretty easy. Stun lock, stun, stun. Pretty easy. Face tank all of his stuff. Not even have a problem. It's such a huge difference going from a Harbinger to an Orbis. It's just crazy to me how much HP the Harbingers have versus how much HP an Orbis has. Also, as well, versus how much damage do they do and stuff like that. There's just such a weird difference. I mean, I'm fine with it. It's just weird, right? All right, here we're going to give you an idea of what the clear looks like at 240C. As you can see, our damage varies wildly. Sometimes I hit a pack of mobs and I crit for 2k. Sometimes I crit a pack of mob for 10k. And that is just the problem with the build in general, is the variance of your damage when you click buttons and when you don't click buttons is such a large difference, especially when you're tired at this point. Remember, I'm playing this pretty much all in one session. One of the biggest problems is like sometimes I'll get a bit tired when I'm playing these sessions. So I'm not feeling like I want to click all my buttons, right? And when I'm playing a button intensive build, those two don't really mix well together, but I end up pulling it through anyways. It's just like, oh my God. It's just like, it feels like a chore. And it's weird because I've played melee primalists like this in the past that have these buttons, but that's because I played with like Swipe, which has melee AoE scaling, right? It can get pretty big. You can play Upheaval, that has pretty good AoE and stuff like that. So like I said, the solution would be to just run a different skill, right? You could just run a different skill for AoE and then run Gathering Storm for single target. But then at that point, all the single target skills, I mean, all the clear skills end up having plenty of single target anyways, which puts you in this weird, awkward position of like, why are you even trying to play Gathering Storm when you could just play something else that just has better clear and has enough damage instead of like a lot of damage like Gathering Storm melee has, right? Now you can notice in the background as well that I swapped out my setup. Instead of running Fury Leap for the pull, I'm actually running Swipe. That's because I realized I wanted just more damage in general. I just wanted more damage. So I can use the Swipe to build up a bunch of stacks. So we have a bunch of attack speed and stuff like that, which means, you know, we can hit really hard with Gathering Storm, but you know, that doesn't really help my clear out much, does it? Now here's our Harbinger of Pride. It actually ends up being really annoying, not because like he's at any threat of killing me, but because he keeps moving. And like I said, because of the way that the buffs work, how they're temporary buffs, if he moves when I'm in the middle of trying to hit him, I end up losing the temporary buffs, and I have to wait for them to come back up again, and then I have to press the buttons again. And it ends up just being this cycle of, oh, I put up my buff. Oh, look, he moved. All right. Go over to hit him again. Oh, my buff ran off. I have to put it up again. Oh, he moved again. And it ends up just being an entire cycle of just that constantly. And it just ends up not being fun. And it's weird because it's such a crazy difference of stun locking everything in the game early on versus this, where, you know, I'm not stunning anything because I'm trying to not abuse stun. I'm just simply trying to use it a little bit to assist me. But what ends up happening is if you're not abusing stun, you never get a stun. But then when you abuse stuns, you end up stun locking the boss into submission. So stun feels like this, and that's the same thing with freeze, and other ARPGs have this problem where like you either CC the boss or you don't, and it's always this if and yes, like yes, no, binary decision, and it never ends up feeling good. And this is why I never build stun in Last Epoch specifically, is because of how binary it feels. And of course, to give you an idea of what I was talking about, here's the Oribus. Look, you see that? He's not able to do anything because I'm stunning him in place. He's not allowed to do anything because, simply put, he just gets stunned every single time he attempts to do anything for the most part, right? And this is like why I don't build stun. Like I said, it's just so inconsistent. The Harbingers have too much HP. So if I want to build into a little bit of stun, it doesn't do anything for me. But then if I build too much stun, and I like way too much stun, you end up with this, where the boss just doesn't do anything and it ends up being a snore fest. Now, here's some 300 corruption gameplay. as I've been pushing really hard in corruption. As you may well know from the last video, I actually changed my strategy where I push up to 300 corruption as quickly as possible, and then I go tell my harbingers and then reduce corruption after doing that, and I ping pong around, and it ends up being a lot more stability, way quicker in general for just the speed of the run. It's just something that makes it faster, but it does mean you need a better build, probably a better one than I'm playing right now. And as you can see, the clear is fine, but trust me when I tell you this, this is like the easier kind of monos where like the trash actually dies. But when you end up with a bunch of Osprix on your screen and stuff, you'll want to control alt delete the game, to be honest, especially with a build like this. So definitely not the best of times, but we have almost enough damage, right? Now here's Rye and the Seventh Harbinger. This is where I essentially rage quit the character in general, mainly because of the clear of the character. My clear felt pretty awful at this point. Like I had enough damage, but I definitely was getting to the point where like I felt like I wanted more gear. So either I had two options, either push through the run with terrible clear and kill the bosses anyways, or just simply quit. And I decided to quit mainly because I only have 3 harbingers to do after this. Like it kind of did the run. It didn't really matter, but I also don't believe in self-harm, which would have been what happened if I kept trying to play the character, right? So, how do I feel about this character? I think that the concept is there. The stats are there, the damage is there for the most part, but it ends up falling prey to the melee problem where my AoE is not that big. If my AoE was bigger, it'd be fine. It wouldn't be that big of a deal, right? The bossing would be fine. If I invested more into stun duration, it'd be fine. But it's not what I enjoy in Last Epoch in general. Like, also as well, I don't know if you saw that, but I hit Rye and stunned him, and he lost access to one of his ward barrier things. That was weird. But yeah, here's the rest of the boss. Like, let me skip ahead a little bit here just to save you some time. But like, I end up just sitting here and face tanking him for most of the fight, and the damage was fine, but not for the amount of buttons I had to press. Like it felt like I'm trying to think, like it felt like playing like a farming sim or something like that, where it felt like I just had to like be like, okay, gotta do the chickens, okay, I gotta like feed the cows, I gotta milk the cows, and all of that just to kill a boss. It just did not feel good. The damage was there, but the fun factor was not there. And that's how I'm like, I feel very mixed in my opinions about this because you go from stun locking Orbis, right? Or stun locking bosses before empowered monos to then pushing to 300 corruption and not feeling good at all. And that's partly because I'm trying to push the build way farther than it should reach because it's not that good of a build in general, mind you. And also as well, it's because I'm in COF and I have no gear, as people would put it. So there's just a lot of different problems that this build has gotten, but whatever. All right, here we are in game with the character. Let's go over everything in detail, shall we? Oh, for our Gathering Storm tree, we make sure we grab Seismic Crash. This allows us to stack strength and do a decent amount of damage. So if you over here, we're getting about 300% increased damage from our strength, while also giving about 75 flat. That ends up being a lot if we were to look at the rest of our stuff, like our weapon here. That easily gives us like 30% more damage right up the bat, on top of all the other flat that we get. And the percent damage, just very good. Makes this actually viable when normally it would not be, especially for a 100% attack damage effectiveness skill. That's pretty much it for that. Then we go over here for Rending Vortex for the crit chance per Maelstrom. This makes it so that we only need to build up a little bit of percent crit, which allows us to actually do plenty of damage with Gathering Storm. Now, of course, we grab some nodes here, some melee area. This is very important as getting the area on Gathering Storm makes it not feel like shit. We grab this for more damage, this for more damage, and this for a little bit of mana to sustain the skills that we're spamming. War Cry here, very important skill. Of course, we're grabbing the less cooldown and the totem, mainly so that we can pull enemies more with apprehend. The idea is we want to pull enemies closer so that we can actually hit them with our melee attacks. Another big thing is to utilize the berserk here. I've managed to squeeze it in with everything else, but like just some attack speed, of course, some flat damage from berserker. Then we also get the maelstroms. Maelstroms from utilizing Warcry, mainly to give us even more base crit. Then we also grab the crit chance over here as well, just 100% crit chance, so that we can cap out our crit quicker. Then Maelstrom, mainly all we care about is Beneath the Waves to cast more Maelstroms. We grab Wind Fury and Windswept to get the Haste and Frenzy, makes any Primalist feel significantly better. Then we also grab Cyclone, which gives us 1% more physical damage per Maelstrom, on top of actually getting Essence of Debris, which is an absurd amount of stun chance, which allows us to stun lock bosses and stuff like that. We didn't grab these notes here, Typhoon, mainly because I didn't ever get plus levels to Gathering Storm. If you were to get plus levels to Gathering Storm, this is something I would definitely grab. Now, Swipe. Swipe is just simply a buff stick, just grabbing aspect of the Panther and stuff like that. Gives us a bunch of flat, a bunch of attack speed, a bunch of more damage, and a bunch of crit multi as well. All of that combined just gives us a lot of extra damage and lets us hit harder with Gathering Storm. Then we also have Frenzy Totem. Frenzy Totem gives us some flat, gives us some 18% more damage, and it also gives us some 90% crit multi. All of that combined leads to our Gathering Storm hitting pretty decently hard. No, that's pretty much it for the skills. Let's talk about the passives that are important. So for passives, main thing we care about is strength. So we grab strength everywhere, of course. Grabbing this leech as well early on helps out a bunch when you're leveling. And eventually we want to grab as much strength as possible from here, getting some aspect of the shark stuff, getting this armor shred chance. This with 10 stacks of aspect of the shark lets us actually stack armor shred to cap on bosses. This is very useful as we're a physical skill and we end up doing a lot more damage because of that, like I think like 70% more damage or something like that. So make sure to get shred as soon as possible. Aspect of the boar stuff, mainly to get access to just that massive amount of DR. So about like 30% DR from aspect of the boar, even more strength. Eventually you'd grab more strength from this. I just wasn't able to grab it because I didn't have enough points at the time. Flat damage as well. We're still stacking flat damage with our strength, but like getting even more flat damage is good. Attack speed is absurdly important. Going for all the aspect of the shark stuff for even more attack speed and percent damage. Getting the percentage crit chance here. Normally you wouldn't grab this, but my gear's pretty bad and I didn't have enough crit chance, so I just needed some extra crit chance global. Then of course eventually you'd grab the crit multi, and also as well Ancient Might ends up being a very strong node because instead of 10 flat it's actually 20 flat and 40% armor and 40% increased damage. So this node actually ends up being insanely strong alongside Gathering Storm's strength stacking node. And that's pretty much it for the passives that are important. If I were to fill out my passives, I'd just get more strength, right? That's mainly what I would get. And that's pretty much it. Now, let's talk about the gearing, shall we? So for gearing here, the most important thing is just the weapon. Getting a good weapon, Hero Dachi, with attack speed and melee flat physical. Eventually you increase area of melee skills and melee critical strike multiplier on the implicit. This is a very good weapon for us. Something like this, but with more stats would be good to go. You could probably invest into a two-handed sword unique, any kind, to be honest. Anything with a bunch of flat damage, a bunch of crit multi, stuff like that. For a unique that we can get, Siphon of Anguish, just gives us that access to Doom, which gives us 4% increased damage taken from enemies. That on top of the Doom belt would be about like probably like 40% more damage. So grabbing those two would be a very good idea. Helmet here, just HP. We're supposed to have strength here, but I didn't manage to get it. Good base though. Amulet here, area, crit chance, HP, res eventually. Instead of that area roll, you want actually exalted area because you want as much area as humanly possible with this skill to make our clear actually feel good, including the area on the weapon as well. I didn't end up getting a good roll on it, unfortunately. chest here. Instead of that vitality, you would actually want Gathering Storm, probably tier 7 instead of the strength being tier 7. That would allow us to get even more increase area, like 40% more, a 40% increase, I mean. And that would help out a lot. But otherwise, the chest is pretty solid. Ring here, crit chance, strength, endurance percentage, because you do need a little bit to cap out because of the way that Beastmaster's defenses work. Generally, you want like a good amount of endurance percentage and threshold as well. Belt here, pretty good belt. Can't really complain about it. Or Siphon of Anguish. Then here, area on the gloves. That's why I accepted this pair of gloves, was because it had area on it. Otherwise, this would be a piece of trash. You can go for way better than this, way better attack speed, HP, way better base, right? Or you can go with, of course, the unique gloves. I can't remember what they're called. Uh, where are they? Falcon Fists here. I actually ended up getting a 3LP one, but I never ended up getting an item to actually slam on it. But Falcon Fists with the area mod and attack speed and maybe an HP roll would be really good on this build, but we didn't manage to get it, of course. Boots here, HP, movement speed, strength. You don't want crit avoid, but I just took what I could get. Relic here, just exalted crit chance is very important because you need some kind of crit. Frailty, strength, HP, good to go. For our idols, there's no good idols for this build, unfortunately. None of them are particularly good, so we just mainly just stack resistance and HP with all of our idols. We can actually get crit chance idols. Those could help out all as well, but mainly you want to go for increased health idols, as that makes up for Beastmaster's lack of HP scaling. And that's pretty much it for the gearing. That's pretty much it for the build. With all that being said, this has been Dread. I'll have to go do something else. Bye.